Good evening and welcome to the LaRouche Organization Friday Symposium. Today is February 28th, and we certainly have a very exciting situation on the cusp, shall we say, of the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution. The fight against the British Empire has finally broken out into the open. I should say that one of the things for which Lyndon LaRouche was attacked incessantly by the British press and their lackeys here in the United States was his attacks on the British Empire. In fact, they went so far as to say that LaRouche was anti-Semitic because when he said British, he really meant Jewish. And then they had the slander that he said the Queen of England was pushing drugs. Well, she was actually in her capacity as overseeing the activity of the Hong Kong Shanghai Bank, a new modern opium war against the world. And as Helga Zepp-LaRouche said recently to a number of us, the British never forgave the American Revolution, and they have been trying to destroy us ever since. Right, not so long after the Revolution was the War of 1812, where they burned down the Capitol. You had the firing on Fort Sumter in 1861, launching the beginning of the so-called Civil War, War of the Rebellion, where the British were backing the slave owners. They dragged us into World War I, which we should have not been engaged in, and basically rewrote history at that point to pretend that our greatest ally was the British, rather than the close relations that we had traditionally had actually with German culture, Germany, and the great poet of freedom, Friedrich Schiller, who was a very optimistic supporter of the American Revolution. And a lot of that history was lost. And then in particular, at the end of World War II, FDR had told Winston Churchill that the United States was not engaged in that war to continue 18th century methods. Churchill blew up and said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Those methods which extract the wealth of nations but give them nothing in consideration." And of course, Churchill said that would be the end of the British Empire, which of course was the point. It was FDR's intent that every single nation should have its independence. Well, now we see that moment occurring, something that Lyndon LaRouche organized for his entire adult life, and his wife, Helga Zepp-LaRouche, and my guests who are joining me tonight have been in this battle for decades. And finally, it is broken out into the open with the recent visits here by British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, French President Emmanuel Macron. You could say the Vice President J.D. Vance fired the opening salvo with his very polemical speech at the Munich Security Conference. But at any rate, it's out in the open. So I thought just for our own viewing pleasure and refresher, and for those of you who haven't seen it, we're going to start with a clip of the visit of Keir Starmer, British Prime Minister, with President Donald Trump.
You know, the British have been incredible soldiers, incredible military, and they can take care of themselves. But if they need help, I'll always be with the British, okay? I'll always be with them. But they don't need help. You look at their career, you have done very well over the years, haven't you?
We have. I'm very proud of our country. And we've also always been backing each other up between our two countries. That is why this is the greatest alliance for prosperity and security I think the world has ever seen. Whenever necessary, we absolutely backed each other up, and that's at the
Could you take on Russia by yourselves?
Well,
all right, one or two more.
So I don't think I have to say that Keir Starmer did not get what he wanted. And to add to this, King Charles has now extended an invitation, which we are all supposed to be crawling on our hands and knees and kissing the hems of Keir Starmer's pant legs, I suppose, that King Charles has invited President Trump to have the second, it's the first time ever in history, 2 state visits with the royal monarch, King Charles, who believes that the world only should have 1 billion people, and I guess wants to foster that belief by prolonging the Ukraine war with Russia for as long as possible, even if there's no Ukrainians left to fight it. And speaking of that, now you can see Zelensky is very confused. Not only is he most likely a drug addict and kind of degenerate actor, but he doesn't understand how the world works. And of course, when Macron was here and after J.D. Vance's speech in Munich, a whole bunch of at least a dozen European heads of state, including Keir Starmer, rushed to Ukraine to once again try and make sure that Zelensky would not sign any peace deal. I don't know what they told him, but by the time Zelensky arrived here, he was saying no, he didn't want a ceasefire. He's clearly not in the real world at all, but I don't have to say that because it was put to him very clearly by the president and vice president. So why don't we go ahead with that clip now?
Say really terrible things about Putin and then say, "Hi, Vladimir, how are we doing on the deal?" That doesn't work that way. I'm not aligned with Putin. I'm not aligned with anybody. I'm aligned with the United States of America and for the good of the world. I'm aligned with the world, and I want to get this thing over with. You see the hatred he's got for Putin. It's very tough for me to make a deal with that kind of hate. He's got tremendous hatred, and I understand that, but I can tell you the other side is exactly in love with, him either. So it's not a question of alignment. I'm aligned with the world. I want to get the thing set. I'm aligned with Europe. I want to see if we can get this thing done. You want me to be tough? I could be tougher than any human being you've ever seen. I'd be so tough, but you're never going to get a deal that way. So that's the way it goes. All right, one more question.
I will respond to this. So look, for 4 years in the United States of America, we had a president who stood up at press conferences and talked tough about Vladimir Putin, and then Putin invaded Ukraine and destroyed a significant chunk of the country. The path to peace and the path to prosperity is maybe engaging in diplomacy. We tried the pathway of Joe Biden of thumping our chest and pretending that the president of the United States' words mattered more than the president of the United States' actions. What makes America a good country is America engaging in diplomacy. That's what President Trump is doing.
Can I ask you?
Sure.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So he occupied our parts, big parts of Ukraine, part of East and Crimea. So he occupied it on 2014. So during a lot of years, so I'm not speaking about just Biden, but those time was Obama, then President Obama, then President Trump, then President Biden, now President Trump, and God bless, now President Trump will stop him. But during 2014, nobody stopped him. He just occupied and took. He killed people. You know what the contact
2015.
2014.
2014 and 2014.
2014.
Yeah. So
I was not here.
Yeah,
That's exactly right.
Yes, but during 2014 till 2022, the situation the same. The people are been dying on the contact line. Nobody stopped him. You know that we had conversations with him, a lot of conversation, my bilateral conversation, and we signed with him. Me, like a new president in 2019, I signed with him the deal. I signed with him, Macron and Merkel. We signed ceasefire. All of them told me that he will never go. We signed him with gas contract. Yes, but after that, he broken this ceasefire. He killed our people and he didn't exchange prisoners. We signed the exchange of prisoners, but he didn't do it. What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come to the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the president for trying to bring an end to this conflict.
Have you ever been to Ukraine? Did you say what problems we have?
I have been to.
Come once.
I've actually watched and seen the stories, and I know what happens is you bring them on a propaganda tour, Mr. President. Do you disagree that you've had problems bringing people into your military? And do you think that it's respectful to come to the Oval Office of the United States of America and attack the administration that is trying to prevent the destruction of your country?
A lot of questions. Let's start from the beginning.
Sure.
First of all, during the war, everybody has problems, even you, but you have nice ocean and don't feel now, but you will feel it in the future. God bless.
You don't know that.
God bless.
You don't
God
know
bless.
that.
You will not have a war.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because
I'm
you're in no
answering on
position
this
to
question.
dictate that.
That's exactly
Remember
what
this.
you're doing.
You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel. We're going to feel very
You will
good.
feel influence.
We're going to feel very
I'm
good and
telling
very
you,
strong.
You will feel influence.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed
From the
yourself
very-
to be in a
from
very
the very
bad position,
beginning
and he
of the
happens
war.
to be right about
From the
it.
very beginning of the war.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having
not playing
cards.
cards.
Right now, you don't.
I'm very
You're playing
serious,
cards.
Mr. President.
You're
I'm
playing
very
cards.
serious.
You're
I'm
gambling
the
with the
president
lives of
anymore.
millions of people.
You think-
You're gambling with World War III.
What you're
You're
speaking
gambling
about?
with
What you're
World
speaking
War
about?
III. And
Me?
what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country,
I'm
that's
with all
backed
respect to
you
you.
far more than a lot of people said
Very
they
respect.
should have.
Have you said thank you once this
A lot
entire
of
meeting?
times.
No, in this
Even
entire meeting,
today.
have you said thank
Even
you?
today.
You went to Pennsylvania and campaigned for the opposition in October. Offer some words of appreciation for the United States of America and the president who's trying to save your country.
Please, you think that if you will speak.
So Zelensky left or was told to please leave and not continue the discussion. President Trump released a short statement on Truth Social saying, quote, "We had a very meaningful meeting in the White House today. Much was learned that could never be understood without conversation under such fire and pressure. It's amazing what comes out through emotion. And I have determined that President Zelensky is not ready for peace if America is involved, because he feels our involvement gives him a big advantage in negotiations. I don't want advantage. I want peace. He disrespected the United States of America in its cherished Oval Office. He can come back when he is ready for peace," unquote. So what happens next, I don't know. If Zelensky is indeed not willing to negotiate, then this will be resolved militarily, which will be done very shortly because Russia is winning the war. And I don't think it's the intention of the Trump administration to continue to arm this regime. So very interesting, very significant. I think we're going to go now to Dennis Speed, who is the host of the LaRouche Organization's Manhattan Project, followed then by Robert Wesser, who was the historian for the Sayre for Senate campaign. But we'll go to Dennis, who will have some things to say about the significance of this and the question of finally getting our independence from the British Empire. Welcome.
Well, thanks a lot, Diane. Sure. I got a lot to say about this. I think one of the things that people should know, if you take a look at the full clip, that actually what happens right after what we've just seen is Trump's full-throated discussion of Russiagate and what, as he said, he and Vladimir Putin went through together on Russiagate. Now, those remarks that are made by Donald Trump in that instance, in that clip, reverse the entirety of Biden policy. Over the entirety of his presidency, and for that matter, it's his refutation of Russiagate. And it doesn't say, he did not say that he was not guilty of colluding with Russia. He said that it never happened. Putin wasn't involved in it at all. That's momentous. So you're in a situation where the truth is Zelensky has no idea what's about to happen. And all of the work that was done by the Europeans coming into the circumstance of the last, this whole last week, Macron's work, Trump, and Stammer's work was all undone entirely by Zelensky, who probably should have left his cocaine stash at home, and just did not understand. Clearly, had no comprehension of where he was, and believed that he could litigate a deal between himself and Russia in front of the press. Ray McGovern, earlier today in a discussion at the International Peace Coalition, talked about his military, industrial, congressional, intelligence, media, academic think tank complex. And he said, I always talk about media as being the linchpin because it's the case that media believes, and media means many of the different ways in which the web of intelligence agencies coordinate the attempt to manipulate international opinion, that they think that they may be able to get through this, but they're not going to be able to get through it. What we're looking at is a curtailing of the special relationship, including with Britain. But we have to see the footprints of this a little bit differently. And I just want to give two examples, and then we'll go to Bob. We have many different things we can talk about, but we're really talking about something which is the end of a process that got traction starting in the years of prior to the First World War, about 1912, 1913, or actually with the Woodrow Wilson and Teddy Roosevelt administrations, and is about to come to an end. It's that we changed our relationship to British intelligence. We shouldn't have done that, but we did do it after the assassination of McKinley, and then the imposition of a British intelligence agent, Teddy Roosevelt, and then after that, Woodrow Wilson, an Anglophile, in the presidency. And that process is sort of coming to an end. Franklin Roosevelt, of course, was the exception to that process. But something happened yesterday, which we should reference with respect to what you just saw, because it is an additional piece to what you just saw. And that was the letter that was written by Pam Bondi to FBI Director Patel, Pam Bondi being the new Attorney General of the United States, in which she referenced the problem of the Epstein files. And it's the problem around the Epstein files, not the content, that I want to call attention to. She said, before you came into office, she's writing to Prakash Patel. Dear Director Patel, before you came into office, I requested the full and complete files related to Jeffrey Epstein. In response to this request, I received approximately 200 pages of documents, which consisted primarily of flight logs, Epstein's list of contacts, and a list of victims' names and phone numbers. I repeatedly questioned whether this was the full set of documents responsive to my request, and was repeatedly assured by the FBI that we had received the full set of documents. Late yesterday, I learned from a source that the FBI field office in New York was in possession of thousands of pages of documents related to the investigation and indictment of Epstein. Despite my repeated requests, the FBI never disclosed the existence of these files. When you and I spoke yesterday, you were just as surprised as I was to learn this new information. That means that they would have spoken on the February the 26th. She's writing this letter on the 27th. By 8 a.m. tomorrow, February 28th, that's today, the FBI will deliver the full and complete Epstein files to my office, including all records, documents, audio and video recordings, and materials related to Jeffrey Epstein and his clients, regardless of how such information was obtained. There will be no withholdings or limitations to my or your access. The Department of Justice will ensure that any public disclosure of these files will be done in a manner to protect the privacy of victims and in accordance with law. as I have done my entire career as a prosecutor, I am also directing you to conduct an immediate investigation into why my order to the FBI was not followed. You will deliver to me a comprehensive report of your findings and proposed personnel action within 14 days. Now, why is this relevant? A lot of people want to say, oh, because of what's in the Epstein files. No, no. First of all, they're misnamed. They should be called the Maxwell files. Then you begin to get at what the actual nature is of the problem. But it's not the fact of what's in the files, which may be very important, but it's irrelevant. What's relevant is that the new head of the Attorney General of the United States and the new head of the FBI were being stonewalled. And the question is, did someone direct that they be stonewalled? And if so, who directed it? And now is the time to name the names, to go precisely after the persons that are responsible, including the so-called higher up or other unnamed persons, so that we are going to end this myth of the so-called deep state. The term deep state is unrigorous, and it's also largely cowardly because there are people with names who are doing these things. And now the question is whether that will be done. And the relevance of the exchange you saw, and it's much clearer in what happens immediately subsequently, is that Donald Trump states, I think it's good for the American people to see this. That's why I have let it go on so long. And then at the end of the exchange, he says, you know, this is going to make for great television. What people don't want to understand, I think, is the degree to which there is a full, a necessary, and frankly, what will become an uncompromising war with Britain that has now been undertaken. It doesn't matter how polite people are. It doesn't matter how dissembling they are or what you're seeing on the surface. Tulsi Gabbard, for example, is involved right now in supporting the actions of two congressmen, one in the Senate, one in the Congress, of preventing British intelligence from getting access to your iPhone, if you happen to have an iPhone or iPad. Apple has asserted that they will not provide a backdoor to their encryption systems, which the British intelligence is demanding, they say, for the purpose of tracking British citizens, but in fact, this would allow them to track American citizens. And what has been suggested by the American congressman is that this is a hostile act by a foreign power against the United States. They're right. That foreign power is Great Britain. So, we put out something earlier this week asking the question whether it's now time, in the honor of the 250th birthday of the American Revolution, to sever the special relationship with Great Britain. And I think that that's the proper question to ask. And I'm going to yield at this point to Bob, because I think he may have some things to say about that. And we can always return to more particulars about the current situation after that.
Well, the only thing, can I be heard okay?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to highlight one simple idea to think about, which is all of this stuff with the special relationship and what Dennis was referring to in 1913. It's all reactionary. It's reactionary by a losing system. And it's always been, since the day we signed that declaration, a losing system. And I want to, well, let me just do this. Start with my favorite. I mean, people have seen me do this before, but hold on a second here. Okay, here we go. So this is John Quincy Adams, his famous speech that he gave on the 4th of July, 1821, in front of the Congress. It's a very long speech. I used to just cite the beginning part of it, which I'll read. It's very powerful. He says, in a conflict of 7 years, the history of the war by which you maintain that declaration, he's talking to the American people, the Congress, became the history of the civilized world. It was the first solemn declaration by a nation of the only legitimate foundation of civil government. It was the cornerstone of a new fabric destined to cover the surface of the globe. It demolished at a stroke the lawful this of all governments founded upon conquest. It swept away all the rubbish of accumulated centuries of servitude. And he goes on. Now, I just used to put that in my classes and stuff. And I used to get comments saying, well, what does he mean? Does it mean we're supposed to go conquer the supposed to go? But remember, this is the same speech where he says, and that's what the paragraph at the bottom, much later on in the speech, you know, wherever the standard of freedom and independence has been or shall be unfurled, there will be her heart, her benedictions and her prayers, our prayers. But she goes not abroad in search of monsters to destroy. She is a well-wisher to the freedom and independence of all. So this is the same speech. So what is he talking about? Destined to cover the surface of the globe. And I want to show a little clip. It's about 2 or 3 minutes from a documentary that we did, and we just re-released it over the last couple months, called Firewall. And it gives you a very clear idea what the content of this is. So let me just get out of this for a minute, and we'll go here. Okay. Oh, I gotta make sure I clicked on the, hold on a second. Just give me 1 second here. Okay, so. There we go. Share something. Okay.
The British Empire ruled by controlling trade in raw materials. So they would have colonies around the world in which they would loot these colonies. But the colonies were never allowed to develop beyond the level at which they needed to develop to make the looting of their raw materials efficient. So you'd build railroads from the mine to the coast, but you'd never build railroads across the continent to tie the continent together as a whole. But it's all about looting and extraction. You don't want these things to become nations, because if they become nations, they start to look at these resources as theirs instead of yours. And that's a problem if you're trying to steal them.
In the post-colonial United States Republic, however, there existed a better vision for the future. The American system, based upon freeing and fostering the creative capacities of mankind, thrived upon a culture of scientific advancement and development of basic economic infrastructure. A vast railway grid stretching from ocean to ocean reinforced the internal sovereignty of the nation and secured independence from any external sea power. In this way, the United States became the first continental sovereign nation state to establish itself on the map in the entire span of recorded history. The international consequences of America's achievement precipitated rapidly. The popularity of the American system spread throughout the globe as other nations perceived its successful thwarting of the British Empire. Nations such as Germany, Russia, and Japan underwent rapid development.
If you promote the creative potential of the human mind, then you also destroy the world in which the empires operate. Because anybody who's got a brain and can see a better way is not going to tolerate these things. And that when the United States, as you saw after the Civil War, when we got the American system up and running and started exporting it to other countries around the world, we were transforming the world. And we were the greatest threat to this system on the planet. And they've been after us to take it down ever since.
Now, you'll probably notice that there is another huge continent. It's called Eurasia. So if you apply what was gone through there about the first continental integrated nation state with the transcontinental railroad to Eurasia, I think you can pretty clearly see that's the end of the empire, because it's all based on controlling choke points and, naval power and, ensuring no internal development. And of course, that's exactly what was on the table coming out of our victory over the British, which is really what it was in the War of the Rebellion. And everything, all the bad stuff that occurred, wasn't just McKinley, it was 3 assassinations in basically a generation. Lincoln, Garfield, McKinley, shock, a real shock and awe. And then the attempted takeover, and it would have really been all sayonara at that point, except for it weren't for the fact that Franklin Roosevelt became the president in 1933. And that was a big problem for this, attempt to stop what is the inevitable march of history, which is this physical principle, which is what the Declaration of Independence is. It's a scientific physical principle destined to cover the surface of the globe. And that's where we are now. I don't know if Donald Trump is fully aware of this or not. Vladimir Putin is, Xi Jinping is, and a whole bunch of people in the global south are. And that's a majority of the planet. So we're going to win this thing because it's where history's going. So that's really what I wanted to throw on the table.
Okay, well, I've got something else, Diane, which I think was probably appropriate for us to show at this point.
Great.
And that is a short clip from Lyndon LaRouche. This is from June 27th, I think, of 2009, a speech he gave, webcast he gave, called Britain Delenda Est. Britain must be destroyed. He's talking here about, of course, not the nation per se, but about the system. And we'll just indicate this here because I think it will help to focus what we're trying to get at.
Europe has no freedom. They are not allowed to create their own currency. They're not allowed to create national credit. They have industries and capacities still, which if they could organize national credit properly, Europe could unify, continental Europe could unify its efforts among nations and actually start a recovery program. They are forbidden to do that by the British Empire, which now holds all of Western and Central Europe as a colony of the British Empire. So the answer to this question lies entirely with the United States. Why? You have to recall history, as I've referred to it repeatedly. And most people don't know what history is even. They think it's a chronicle, a series of events. It's not. History is a process. It's like a living organism, a process which generates its development, its successes, its successive phases. You can't understand the United States unless you go to its origins. You have to go to Christopher Columbus. It's very important. If you don't understand Christopher Columbus properly, you don't understand where the United States came from. You don't know what's embedded in his character. You don't understand Christopher Columbus if you don't know Nicholas of Cusa, the man who defined the institution of the modern nation state, who defined modern science, who set up the end of religious warfare as a policy, which became, again, the 1648 Peace of Westphalia, was that policy. So the institutions which the United States was hatched as a nation go back way back in history, in a history of European culture in particular. We were formed here to escape from Europe in order to bring the best of European civilization into a different continent. The effort was made from Spain into South America, most notably. The effort was made in particular beginning 1620 in Massachusetts with the arrival of the Pilgrims, and then the later Massachusetts Bay Colony. What the intention was, these were not refugees. These people who created this nation were not refugees. They came here to bring the best of European civilization to a new continent where it would be free of the corruption of Europe, the moral and cultural corruption of Europe, which is largely the history of oligarchy. We are an anti-oligarchical nation. We have nothing to do in our tradition with the monetary systems of Europe. We came here and founded this nation to be free of the monetary systems of Europe, to be free of things like the IMF today, to be free of the British Empire. People came from Europe in particular to this territory to join and participate in building a nation which would carry forth the best of European civilization, its best heritage, but free of the oligarchical problem which still sat on top of the people of Europe. People came here not to get away from Italian, not to get away from French culture, not to get away from German culture, but quite the contrary, to free these cultures by bringing these cultures here, to bring the best of them here, and to develop here the best of European civilization, but free of the oligarchical systems of Europe. Therefore, we have embedded in our history and in traditions of an organic type which we can evoke anytime we have the guts to do so. We can evoke, again, the European heritage which is specific to the United States, a United States which was created to get free of the evil in Europe, the incompetence in Europe. We can launch that again from the United States under our Constitution, which was designed for this mission.
Okay, so I think what's important about that is that that can define easily for people what to understand about what the problem is with the EU, what the problem is with NATO in terms of why they are sclerotic, they are paralyzed conceptually. It's not just, in other words, the individual habits of the various people, and there are nefarious habits that may make them incapable of thinking, but the entire structure doesn't work and can't work. This is significant because what J.D. Vance referenced in his attack on Munich, the point is it needs to be looked at from a completely higher standpoint, not merely his attack, but the problem that he was trying to address. That's what LaRouche does throughout the entirety of this particular webcast, but in this particular section, by noting what the nature is of what actually happened to found the United States. It's not a refugee project. It is something completely different, something very conscious. And in fact, the most important intelligence capabilities and agencies that were created by the Americans. The British intelligence, which ostensibly created the CIA and so on, and that's actually largely, in one sense, true, is itself a reaction to the much more highly successful American Franklin-based conspiracy that created the American Revolution. In the latter phases, there was an earlier American Revolution that happened in Massachusetts. And what I think we've got to do for this 250th birthday, remember that as of April 19th, Saturday, that's the 250th anniversary of Lexington and Concord. And if you want to understand what the problems of in America today is, people aren't even talking about this, whereas this should be the primary daily topic of discussion. And that may, by the way, be partially precipitated by what happened at the White House today. Certainly, that's one way we can respond to it, by very happily responding to what happened, what the president and J.D. Vance caused to occur with the help of Mr. Zelensky, who may not have understood what precisely he was acting as the foil of. So I think it's a very interesting sort of situation for us and for people that understand what this entire idea of the 250th could be caused to mean and why Europe is not going to regain its footing. There's no place for it to go. It's a decayed process which the British actually have manipulated, and they are not able to manipulate the United States in the way in which they have previously. It doesn't mean it's all over, but it means that we're in a different position altogether.
Now, I wanted to pick up on a thread that Lynn LaRouche brought up in that, which is the question of culture. and this idea of the best of cultures, or that cultures could come here and flower free of oligarchical tendencies, because ultimately that was the way the British recaptured us to a very large degree. And I really want to urge everyone watching this program to think about what you think is your culture. What kind of music do you like? What kind of clothing do you wear? Why do you think that's your culture? LaRouche used to joke quite a bit about the so-called fashion industry, how they decide what's going to be popular, and then they quote unquote flood the zone. I've noticed in Manhattan, for example, on Madison Avenue, the most expensive clothing generally is really ugly. It's hideously ugly. It's like a sick joke. It's like the Emperor's New Clothes, where somehow this is people pay a lot to wear these ugly things because a lot of advertising has been put into that. But it's the same with music. If you think about the destruction of young people, the sexualization of children, what they called I think it was the Common Core, where they said reading. First of all, they said, we don't want to have fiction. We only want to have people read instruction manuals. But then they also said, if you want children to learn how to read, you have to use things that are really emotionally gripping, like violence, sex. That's sick. It's really sick, and it destroys one's ability to be creative. So the Tavistock Institute and the CIA, one of the things that the Church Committee uncovered was that there was a project, very willful, to destroy the culture of the United States. And Theodore Adorno, who ended up at Hollywood and who created the Top 40, had a series of steps which so-called popular music was designed to induce. The fourth step, he said, was that necrophilia is, quote, the latest perversity of style. And I think that to be truly free is not freedom, or as Leibniz and our Declaration of Independence says, the pursuit of happiness, is not, quote unquote, the right to do whatever you want to do or engage in pleasures like getting high or something debased, but is actually to participate in the unfolding creation of the universe, to use and develop your God-given talent to create something which contributes to the immortality of mankind. And I really think our nation had that uniquely as a conception. It was picked up by other nations. Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam, who became our enemy, Haiti, which we have destroyed. And I think this conception is perhaps the greatest threat to oligarchism.
I think what you said is very important in that, Diane, because this last point in particular, the issue is not casting aspersion or simply guilt. It's more, for example, in the case of Haiti, where Alexander Hamilton played an important role in drafting the Haitian Constitution. But then because of various both racist but also just oligarchical initiatives, that place has been continually over and over raped as it is now. And now it's largely sort of dominated by a drug traffic that really dominates the entirety of Central America and South America. And when you're looking at things like the border problem, you're really looking at long-term crime that's been committed by British intelligence and the Bank of Hong Kong and Shanghai in particular, now called HSBC, which ran that traffic and was running that traffic as a way of making a transition from the dollar to the narco dollar. And that's a crime that may actually be able to be brought to light, ironically, at this time, precisely because of a lot of the focus on the border. Because you can't focus just on the people who are trying to avoid getting killed in El Salvador or coming to America because they don't want to get killed at home. You've got to go to the banks that have been not only the enablers, but have been the profiteers. And I think that's a good example of the kind of thing that may very well happen in this circumstance of investigation. We certainly can bring that to the FBI or some of these other agencies. And I also think in upcoming months, we all know we're going to be doing a conference that will allow many of these sorts of people who have been working with us for many years to maybe assemble and begin to deliberate on how to act as a kind of advisory committee to the Director of National Intelligence and maybe even to the FBI on really pursuing the real criminals, and they're going to be in the financial establishment. There may be some other matters, law enforcement matters, that should be taken up of the other type, but that's also a law enforcement matter that I think really becomes very important.
Bob,
Yeah. I mean, the other thing I just brought up our conference that we're having, which is everybody should sign up for and register for. But this is perfect. That should be the theme. Finally completing the American Revolution. That's how we celebrate. Because there are people doing all sorts of, little things here. Like I'm a member of this Sons of the American Revolution, and they're doing a whole big thing in Lexington and Conquer, and they're going to do reenact. That's all. It's all fine and good, but we're not celebrating. If we're going to celebrate, we have to complete the revolution. That's the celebration, and that's us. That's the LaRouche organization. That's what Lyndon LaRouche's entire life was committed to, was completing that revolution globally. And I think that's our mission and that's our task. Because, Dennis sent me a few weeks ago, I think he sent it to a few people, the White House has issued this executive order, right? We're celebrating America's 250th birthday. And it's going to be a grand celebration, and we're going to do this, and then we're going to do that. Well, who's going to shape that? That guy that they always play that sings that stupid song about what is that? I love to be an American.
Right.
Proud to be an American, right?
Proud to be an American. Yeah. I mean, to the credit of my SAR buddies, every time they heard that, it would go, So, but who's going to shape that? Who's going to shape that conceptually? Think of what Grant did in 1876. Think of what we did in Philadelphia. I've done some presentations on that. On the best, we exhibited what the United States really was, and that's good. That's our task, and I think that should be the theme of the conference. And that, if we want to celebrate, let's complete the revolution. That's the celebration. So,
one thing that reminds me of, Diane, is that scheme you talked about before about the 10,000 person chorus, which of course they used to do. And of course, that was when the country had a lot less people than it has now. So those sorts of ideas.
Oh, no, Dennis is coming up with an idea for a 10,000.
I mean, she did it. She did
We're going to have to get a bigger hotel.
So hey, it's a big country. It should be a big celebration. Okay, it's a good idea, right? But I was going to ask you, Diane, also, you've talked and been trying at different times in your own case to get back Freedom of Information Act documents around Lyndon LaRouche, his case, the whole issue of that. And I'm bringing it up because, again, on this question of what we saw today, again, with Zelensky and Trump, and what we can anticipate may occur at the FBI now. I wonder, how do you see the possibility, not merely of getting those files, but maybe creating a way that the combination of the Malcolm X, JFK, RFK, the LaRouche case, there's a few others, how that could actually create a cultural paradigm shift in the United States or aid that shift?
Well, I think the LaRouche case is really important because of what LaRouche represented, which was so clearly this the true American tradition, and therefore his enemies would be the leading opponents of that tradition, and therefore everyone should want this. And don't forget that while we like to use the 1982 letter from Henry Kissinger to William Webster, then head of the FBI, later head of the CIA, talking about, LaRouche is getting obnoxious and I'm worried and thank you for sending me his flyers. The part of this was triggered by a letter we still haven't been able to get from British intelligence or London or the monarchy or who knows, but British in origin to the United States, urging them to launch this. So I think that's very important. I think the chances now, frankly, are quite good because, after all, more than 50%, the majority of the American people who voted for a man who is now president, who was under 91 indictments, a number of convictions, called every name in the book. I don't have the thing in front of me, Dennis, if you do, and have those exact quotes from what the British were calling Donald Trump. And people said, we don't care. It's genocide, Joe. He's perpetrating a genocide in Gaza. He wants to get us in a nuclear war. He's sending long-range missiles to Ukraine to use against Russia. The inflation is out of control. We can't afford to buy food. We can't afford to buy a house. We can't put gas in the car. We're sick of this. We're voting against this. We don't care. You can tell us whatever you want to tell us about Donald Trump. We're voting for Trump. So a population that is in that mindset is not really going to be impressed by the slanders that, for example, you'll find about LaRouche on Wikipedia. I just had a meeting with someone recently who said, well, can't you change the Wikipedia page? And I said, we've tried that and they keep changing it back. Or others, a dear supporter who both of you know, who went out to organize for my campaign and comes back and says, Diane, can you tell me, are we communists or are we Nazis? I'm trying to get this, because that's what happens. That's over. And in fact, Václav Havel, who ended up becoming the head of the Czech Republic briefly, but who was there when the Soviet Union broke up, he wrote a book called The Power of the Powerless. And he said there comes a point when the enforcers of the dictatorship no longer are able, not only can they no longer control what everyone thinks, but everyone knows that their neighbor knows that they no longer control what people think. And when you get to that point, the revolution is on. That's what we're in. I am terribly concerned that we shape the way this goes because it's not enough to eliminate a whole bunch of really corrupt and horrible things that are evil. But the question is to do the good and to follow through not only with ending the wars, but to retool these military cooperations and to actually build the United States in the way that Bob was showing from the Centennial exhibition. But today with modern technology, it is shameful that the United States does not have 1 millimeter of actual high-speed rail. And you can talk to anyone who's traveled outside the country and you say, is it true that the United States is the most prosperous country in the world with the highest standard of living? And they will laugh at you because our cities look like they were in a war zone. Driving is an obstacle course to avoid the potholes and people dying of drug overdoses, while you make your way through the city. This needs to be addressed. This is part of completing the American Revolution.
Yeah, I will respond. I know you, I don't know how much time we have, but on what you were saying about these quotes, I just want to set this up there because there was something, I think Dave has it. You may remember, Diane, in December 2018, the British House of Lords had this thing from UK Foreign Policy and a Shifting World Order. And what they said, if we can bring that up, I'll just read it anyway. The U.S. administration has taken a number of high-profile unilateral foreign policy decisions that are contrary to the interests of the United Kingdom. Now, this is during the first Trump administration. However, the difficulty the UK and its allies have faced in trying to influence the U.S. demonstrates the challenge of working with the administration. How damaging this will be to what has hitherto been the UK's most important international relationship will depend on whether the current approach is an enduring trend. Should President Trump win a second term or a similar administration succeed him, the damage to UK-US relations will be longer lasting. and the government will need to place less reliance on reaching a common US-UK approach to the main issues of the day than has often been the case in the past. All right, so that was what they had anticipated what happened when Trump came back to power. So now I'll just read, because you're talking, Diane, about the British and what they had to say about Trump. I think it's important for people to realize that the person who is the assigned to come, the ambassador to the United States, Peter Mandelson, was quoted. This was in the London Telegraph of 2019. It's saying Trump is, quote, an American president who is little short of a white nationalist and racist. So that's the ambassador, right, to America. The foreign secretary, equivalent to Secretary of State, quoted back in 2018 saying, Trump is not only a woman-hating, neo-Nazi sympathizing sociopath, he is also a profound threat to the international order that has been the foundation of Western progress for so long. That was him. That's the foreign minister. And then the prime minister, Keir Starmer, who was just here, this was back in 2020, said Donald Trump's approach is to stoke division, to pit one group against another, and that's not leadership. It's the opposite of what any country needs. So I don't know whether he walked in and said, well, Mr. President, what I meant to say was, but Donald Trump would know that these things were said. In fact, we sort of assisted that they would know that they said these things. So that's just sort of the background. And I'd like to ask a question I never put to either you or, well, not in this venue, maybe not to just keep on going on, but because you brought up the power of the powerless, Diane, and Václav Havel. So, Bob, first to you and then Diane. Václav Havel was a flawed individual who wrote a very good book. Okay. When he came into power, then it was a different thing. I mean, he made Frank Zappa the director of culture, and there were a lot of things like that. But he wrote a good book, and it's a very useful thing for people to read, particularly people who feel powerless. Bob, obviously, this business with the founders of the country, when we get to Jefferson, et cetera, this is the question of the slavery business and all this other stuff. So now, the issue, which I think I want to hear what you had to say about it, I have my own views of it, about the flaws of the people that made the revolution and why that doesn't have, or what relationship that is to what they actually did. Obviously, flawed people always do whatever is done. But
Well,
how do you think about that?
Yeah, it's not the flawed people, it's the flawed system. And the flawed system was introduced explicitly by the British, i.e. slavery, to undermine the noble ideas with Winthrop, what you refer to, the Massachusetts Bay Colony, which is the beginning of the American Revolution. It's in 1640. It's not in whatever, which is why they launched the 1619 Project, by the way, to throw all that overboard, under the bus. And so, for example, this whole thing with Hamilton, this stupid lady wrote this whole thing about Hamilton and slavery. Of course, Hamilton was one of the most passionate anti-slavery founding fathers. So, but he signed a bill of sale for some guy in Albany who had a slave, and it was the system. It was the system that was introduced. It was completely antithetical to everything that the real American founding fathers, stood for. And so you could always, it's like 100 years from now, someone could say, "You shopped at Walmart. Do you know what those people did? That corporation did. Were you a Walmart shopper? Did you buy that slave labor produced baseball that those little kids in Indonesia died for?" It's ridiculous. So now some were worse than others. So, Jefferson had a problem with this, obviously, a big problem. But I think that's the way to look at it. And you wouldn't have, and this is a whole longer discussion. I defer to Frederick Douglass on all of these issues. He gave the speech in 1860, why the U.S. Constitution is not a pro-slavery document. People should read it. It's very thorough. It's a legal argument from the highest standpoint, and he spells it out, right? And they wouldn't have put all this stuff in there about slavery going out of existence if they intended to perpetuate slavery. So this is something that we should do a lot more on, I think, a lot more work on. But that's my view. It was a system introduced to subvert otherwise noble ideas here in North America. And then obviously then perpetuated with the British, because they bought 95% of all the cotton imported into Britain, what came from the Confederacy. So that was part of the deal.
And Diane, what I was thinking about in terms of you is you, because of your runs for office and so on, have had to deal with and all the time have to deal with the problem of the flawed people that we're trying to change right now in the country. You know?
Yeah. You know, I just had a thought from something that Bob said, which is eluding me. But I mean, this is really, look, we also have to have the idea, each of us, I hate to say it, I know the three of us on this program are entirely consistent and always perfect and have never changed or admitted that we ever committed an error. But aside from us, most people are not that consistent. And it makes history a bit complex because people actually have a wrong idea. And especially if you're looking back in time, you may not know what information was available to someone or what they had been told or had they been lied to, which led to them taking a certain wrong decision. And I just remembered what I was thinking, which is, whom does this hurt? Frederick Douglass talked about it in one way, watching his mistress who had taught him how to read. And finally, she was chastised harshly enough by her husband that she stopped. And when she made the decision that she was no longer teaching Douglass to read, she became a very nasty, shrill, cranky, unhappy person. That is, her decision to do something which went against the natural development of man destroyed her. Her choice to not continue the lessons with Frederick Douglass did not destroy him. It destroyed her. And similarly, I know Mr. LaRouche had a conversation years ago with one of our dear colleagues who happens to be from Iraq, who was understandably enraged that the United States killed 1 million people in Iraq based on lies, as we know. But imagine being Iraqi, imagine knowing many, many people who had been killed in that. And LaRouche said, look, as much as you are upset about this, the United States will be more destroyed by this action. And you see it in these generations of people whom we have sent into unjust wars based on lies. Our government has deployed young men and women to commit crimes against humanity, to go against natural law, to inflict pain and suffering on other human beings. That destroys you, and it destroys the culture. And I think it can be undone. This is where certain Christian principles are very important. I think atonement, mercy, forgiveness, people's ability to forgive themselves, but also if people are then enabled to engage in a positive mission, then you can restore the meaning of their lives. And people have an ability to become something other than whatever crimes they may have committed. And I think this is also part of the mess that we're dealing with culturally, which is why I think it's very, very urgent that we get some positive programs for the American people to be engaged in. We need them urgently. Our physical economy is in a breakdown, but also we have to make that cultural shift.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
So probably at the end now, aren't we? Or-
Yes. So
I just
go ahead, Bob.
one thing with on that. I mean, since I'm doing these LaRouche shows and I'm putting together a lot of LaRouche material on these Sunday shows, you know, with we did the LaRouche case hearings that were held in 1997, 95, sorry. And at the end, Ramsey Clark says, you know, we got to think of what we were doing with that civil rights movement. We were out there marching. We were impassioned. We were going to make everything better. And that's Americans. That's what we do. Just in line with what you're saying, Diane, because that's the best of our country. And we have those moments, and we have those moments in recent history. So.
Exactly. Dennis, any closing thoughts?
I just think that it's an interesting question to think about, the fact that the world should be called upon, of course, to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the United States. But what United States, right? Like, think about Philadelphia and what it looks like now. And you've referenced it, Diane, about the drug addicts and all this other problem. I mean, how are you going to do this? So it's, I think, an interesting challenge for us to think about, because the world would be perfectly happy to do that, but you'd have to have an America that was worth celebrating. I'm not suggesting we don't have people that are worth celebrating, but that's what I would say. I think, and you know, yeah, this idea of 20,000 people out chorus singing, that's an interesting idea that you.
20,000. Lynn said 5,000. Now it's 10,000. Now it's 20,000. And if we continue, it'll be 40,000.
All right, end the call, quick.
Yeah, right. Let me just say, before I do that, I would want to encourage everybody who's watching, visit schillerinstitute.com, SCHILLER institute.com, to sign up and register for the Memorial Day weekend conference. Also, visit the LaRouche.org. I posted that link in the chat on one of the platforms, which is the YouTube platform of the LaRouche organization. Sign up for our emails, donate, and volunteer. If you can do a donation of $10 per month or more, you will get the regular online publications of the LaRouche movement. And I would just tell you, we have a beautiful opportunity right now. We won't have it forever, and nothing is locked in. So please don't take anything for granted. Don't say, okay, we stopped Joe Biden and everything's going to be great. It is not going to be great. You heard from what Dennis read. The British have not given up. They said Trump could never be elected to a second term. All of them flooded over to Ukraine to make sure Zelensky wasn't going to work with this peace process. There's going to be all kinds of monkey wrenches thrown in, and we need a movement to address that. So please support us, like, share, subscribe, and thank you very much for tuning in this evening.